Hello and welcome to the Blessed by Angels podcast. In this episode, I wanted to share with you a little more about myself, along with how I stepped into mediumship. Welcome to the Blessed by Angels podcast. My name is Jenn Gilbreth. Ever since I was a little girl, I have felt deeply connected to the angelic realm. Over the years, I have dedicated my time and energy towards delivering messages from beyond. Yes, that's right. I talk to dead people, although I don't necessarily consider them dead. In many ways, they are much more alive than us in this physical realm. On this podcast, I will be channeling messages from spirit. Whether you tune in each week for the new messages or feel like picking a message at random, this podcast is designed for spirit to lead you to the messages for you here and now. These messages have changed the way I view and play in life. I hope that these messages can do the same for you. Now, as I get started, I wanted to first preface that this podcast is going to be longer than the additional episodes to come. I will be delivering these messages, but I just thought it was a good idea to kind of share my experience stepping into mediumship, along with how that showed up for me. And I'll do a brief recap. I do have a book coming out shortly that has in detail experiences and how more of that showed up. So I'll keep you posted when that is available for purchase or to listen to. So going forward, ever since I was little, I have felt very connected to the spirit realm. It showed up a lot in anxiety. I felt very fearful. I felt very afraid. Um, I just could feel as if someone was watching me constantly. And I didn't necessarily understand why or what that was. I remember going to bed at night and I wet the bed till I was 12 because I almost was so nervous to get out of bed because I felt such darkness around me, where I could see these red eyes and see things that really were very intimidating and very scary. And at a very young age, I started getting headaches pretty much every day. So we ended up going to a bunch of different doctors. We took all kinds of tests, and none of the Western medicine, there were no answers to be found. And at that point, my mom started taking me to more of the Eastern medicine side of healing, where she helped me learn about meditation. And I did a lot of acupuncture. I went to a Nuka chiropractor, just a different way of finding healing and finding relief for the anxiety and the headaches. You know, at one point in elementary school for quite a while, we had a nurse who knew me by name. And when I would have a headache, and this was probably 3 or 4 times a week, to be honest with you, I had a ritual where I would have a water bottle in my backpack. And if I got a headache, I would take my water bottle and I'd keep it on my desk and I would drink all of that water. And my teachers also knew about this. And then I would wait a little bit, like 20 minutes. And if I still had a headache, then I had an ibuprofen in my backpack and I would go and take ibuprofen. And at some point, my mom decided, it's probably not the best idea for her to be just popping ibuprofen every single day with a headache. And so finally, sometimes it would get so bad that I'd have to go lay in the nurse's office, and both my parents worked, so I didn't have a way to get home. And so from there, the nurse would put me laying on the bed, on like their nurse bed, and then I'd put a washcloth on my eyes. And finally, we came to an agreement that I would drink my water bottle, and then if it was still there, I would go lay in the nurse's office for like 20 minutes. So I would even walk in, she'd say, "Hi, Jenny." And she'd say, "You have a headache today?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay, go lay down." And then she would bring me a washcloth or a cold washcloth or something that was cold and icy. And then I would have a little timer that I would just kind of turn on and lay down there for about 20 minutes or so. as a way to reset, to let go of my headache, but it was also for me to get back into my energy and to ground myself back down. And I just remember laying in my parents' bed listening to this beautiful colors meditation where whenever I had pain in my head or my body, it was like the color was added extra into those places to bring in healing and relief. And so for pretty much like 4th grade, even into high school, I would use this meditation as a way of helping and healing my body. And, when I was little too, I felt very private. I still am a very private person. But in that space, I also felt very um secluded in many ways. But I kind of like to have my alone time and to be separate and to have my space. And it didn't seem to bother me. And I always had fairies that were around me that would communicate and talk to me. I have a fairy named Harmony who she was always there when I felt alone or sad or when I had a really bad headache or I was super anxious. She was always there to help me find light or to find a relief and to find hope in what I was experiencing. And for that, I just am so grateful. And she taught me a lot about who I was, a lot about spiritual experiences. She helped me understand and navigate why I was feeling the way that I was. And as I look back now at an adult, I could see this fairy or this guardian angel, whatever people want to call it. She was helping me step into my spiritual gifts. And in fact, she was as a coach to help me so I wouldn't shut them down because it was so overwhelming. But she was my constant, my harmony. My harmony girl was there. And even my nieces and nephews to this day, if I were to say, "Hey, do you remember Harmony?" They would all be like, "Yeah, that's your fairy." And I would always do things and incorporate them as they were growing up with my fairy realm as well. So that was just a really beautiful sense of relief for me. And it was just so playful and fun. I remember when my grandparents passed on my dad's side, I felt very connected, and it almost felt like I was experiencing and reliving what they were experiencing in the spirit realm. And that scared the shit out of me. I did not know how to handle that. I felt so drawn into the spirit realm, and it was actually very intimidating to feel that connected and to feel almost as if I was in the spirit realm. And I had this fear like, I don't want to be there. I don't want to die. I don't want to leave early. But for some reason, I just felt so engaged and so called into that space. And I ended up going throughout my junior high years, just really trying to focus on friends and dance and school. And, when I'd get anxious or overwhelmed or stressed, I'd have my meditation practices. At that point, I was going and using acupuncture, um, along with clean eating, a lot of different things to help me so I wasn't stepping into that anxiety as much. And I could focus on being a human in the world. Along with in high school, I ended up having, a friend who had a parent pass away, and I just felt this mother around me so much, and it was almost overbearing at times where, I had dreams of her showing up and, "Hey, I need you to say this, I need you to do this, or I need you to go check on this person," and it was almost as if she was a guide helping me step further into my magic. And I only met her a couple of times, but her life had a very big impact on who I was. And just being able to feel her presence around and to notice when spirit was showing up and how that worked for me. And so I'm so grateful for that soul, her soul to show up and to help me to navigate and to step into this. And growing up, I always used to watch The Medium or The Ghost Whisperer. I was always watching movies and series all about helping souls transition to the spirit realm. Even in like elementary school, it was something that was so fascinating to me. In high school, when I was feeling overwhelmed or just feeling disconnected, I found that prayer and scripture study, along with going for runs or taking a walk in the cemetery, was one of the ways that I connected into my soul and I felt more grounded And going to the cemetery was very sacred for me. It always brought me such peace and such calm, and I felt inspired going into the cemeteries. And I know that's a pretty common thing for people who are pretty sensitive. And you would almost think it's counterproductive. It's like opposite of that. But really, it's such a beautiful relief. And I still feel that to this day. So, having that been said, after I graduated, I just felt really called. I stepped into watching like Teresa Caputo and John Edwards, and I could just see how they were delivering messages, and it felt so uplifting. It felt so soulful, and I just felt called to do so. And it was a very scary time too, because I felt like, okay, I really feel called to do this and I really want to do this, but also, can I? And is this okay? Growing up in a Christian household, I wasn't entirely sure how it would align. And I started also experiencing paranormal activities in the house. And I have a lot of friends who would say that when they were with me, they would experience paranormal stuff. And it was kind of just normal for me, but for some people, it was almost like she brings this paranormal activity and it's a little bit freaky. So I just was trying to navigate everything, all the things going on. And as I watched John Edwards and Teresa Caputo, I just felt so inspired. And every time my heart would just ignite on fire. Like it was like, this is a calling, this is what I'm supposed to do. But I also wanted to stay mainstream. I wanted to be normal. I didn't want to be someone who talked to dead people. And how would that look in a church that was not open to that? How would that look to my community and my friends who just knew me as someone not that way? But I just kept feeling called and called and called. I ended up going on a service mission for the church that I was a part of growing up. And it was a beautiful time of learning to surrender and to trust whatever thoughts would come to mind. They talk about it being like listening and letting the Holy Spirit guide you. And I spent 18 months of my life dedicated to learning and listening and essentially channeling the spirit realm. And it was such a sacred time for me to not have any other disruptions, distractions, but just to solely listen and hone in my vessel and my trust in the spirit realm. And I find that even during sessions now, as I'm connecting in, I have a very deep sense of trust for what's going to come forward. And just knowing that as I open my mouth and as I'm aligned, things will come forward. Validation will be offered. I will see and feel and know and share things that are in tune. And I really do put a lot of that emphasis on because I spent that time honing in and trusting and learning to channel. And I'm so honored for that opportunity. And it's such a huge part of my space stepping forward. So as I came back from that, I just felt like the pressure of having to get married young and start a family and yada, 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 that finding someone and stepping into a relationship was like what was defiant on who I was. And so I made a lot of decisions. I pushed a lot of different relationships and I tried to do things for people who maybe weren't as accepting or it just wasn't their path to honor and to support. And I knew that I needed that support. I went through a lot of heartbreak, a lot of heartache, finding people who were not open, who said negative things, who it felt like the dating process really was ripping my soul apart to the point where I decided that I was going to shut it all down and go back to college and just try to be the perfect girl to find somebody and to just disregard that aspect of who I was. And the moment that I made that decision, I instantly felt a gray filter over my eyes where I felt like I wasn't living my full potential because of fear. And that fear took hold and it was heavy and it was dark and it sucked. But I went back to school and I got a job at the dental office and I was assisting and I would go to school and I was just feeling so distraught, like just so heavy and so alone in the process. And reflecting on it, it's such an interesting experience. Because I'm trying to recap, but not go into too much detail at the same time. Hey there, I wanted to take a brief moment to thank you so much for listening and being a part of Blessed by Angels podcast. I have found that our angelic team wants to help remind us who and why we are earthside at this present moment. The more that we remember the angelic support that we are given, the easier it is for us to live life to the fullest. So, if this message or any of the previous messages from the podcast have really stuck out to you, I would encourage you to send them to anyone who you feel could benefit from the messages. Or if you feel prompted, I would love for you to leave a review on any of the platforms that you are listening on. I would love to hear your feedback. Blessings. And I would have opportunities where I would pray or I would align and someone would reach out. Hey, I heard that you do this. Can we set up a time? Can I meet with you? How does this work? And it was like during those times that I would trust spirit and surrender and just allow whatever to come in. I felt that gray filter leave my eyes, and life was so much more vibrant and it was so much more exciting and alive, and I just felt free. And as I felt that twinge of freedom, I really had this desire to start blogging about my experiences. And I started at childhood and I led up to my current present moment at that time. And it was almost like my way of coming out of the spirit closet, is what people call it. And I shared online and I was just kind of being more vocal. But as I was writing and reflecting, I was healing and activating more inside myself. But as I said, in that Christian community, and I was going to a Christian college, um, first I would have people who were like, "This is so amazing, I love this," while others, I had some family members who literally were like, "Hey, you are being deceived by the devil. You need to watch what you're doing and you need to pray for your soul because you are being deceived right now." There was so much heaviness and so much openness at the same time. I just started sharing authentically and moving forward and sharing in my space. And people just started coming out of the woodworks who were like, "Hey, I would love to meet with you. And I would love to set this up." So, on the process of going to school, working full time, and then putting these into space, I was just feeling like, okay, I can do this. I could do this if I wanted to. And I found myself more often, instead of doing my homework, I was writing blogs. Instead of doing my homework, I was writing poems, I was channeling messages, I was doing meditation that really felt make me feel so alive inside. And it wasn't until I was turned in, you could say, that I finally made the decision that I needed to embrace this further. So I had some roommates who honestly were, I mean, I could have done this a whole lot better, but I had a roommate. And I don't know who specifically it was. Anyways, that doesn't necessarily matter. But I had someone turn me into my church leader and say, "Hey, she's doing this. I'm not okay with it. I thought you should know about it." And I guess I just suspect it was some of my roommates because I even used to have like big crystals in my room. And I went home for a weekend and came back and they were thrown away. So anyways, I go into this meeting, and typically for that school is you have to be interviewed to make sure you're worthy to go to the next semester of school. So I thought, oh, maybe it's just like the interview process for my next semester. Well, clearly the moment I sat down, it was not that. It was far from that. And the bishop said, "Hey, I know I've heard that you have this blog. I've heard what you're doing. Can you please tell me more about it?" So I started sharing about my promptings and my childhood and all the different things. And at the end, he said, "Well, does anyone have any problems with what you do?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, dating's been a little interesting, but I know at some point it'll be fine." And he looked at me and said, "Sister Case, if you do not stop delivering messages, and if you do not stop what you're doing, I am here to tell you that you will never get married. And it felt like a dagger in my heart. It was so heavy and so brutal and just so awful. It just felt terrible. And I I left that meeting and I wish I had stood up for myself more. But I was just so dumbfounded. I was so shocked. I did not know what to say or what to experience. I remember getting in my car and sitting there holding my steering wheel, just like screaming at God. Like, how dare you make me feel so lit up and excited and inspired to do this work and then have this happen? Like, how dare you do that to me? What the hell? Like, it just felt soul wounding. And it was at that moment I decided that going to college and going to that school was no longer safe. And the next day, that was on a Sunday, the next day was a Monday, I went to my office and I said, "Hey, um, I'm putting in my notice." And I ended up just staying for an extra week. Um, like my notice for a week. And I remember literally within that week, within 1 week of him saying that, I had decided, you know what? If no one's going to be with me, if I'm never going to find somebody, then I'm going to live the life that I want. And I quit school in the middle of the semester, dropped out, and I put in my notice. I left my dental assisting job and I moved back in with my parents. And I had been living in Idaho at the time. And luckily, my parents had a basement that I had my own room. And then I had an extra room that I could turn into a session room. And that's one thing that I am so grateful for is that I've had such family support. And my parents have always been there cheering me on, wanting to hear about things. You know, when people would leave their house, when I was meeting with them, they would always say, "How was it? Was it amazing?" Like, just so the best parents for support. And I'm so lucky and so honored to have them. And I moved home. This is the crazy thing though. Within 20 minutes of putting in my notice, I had someone reach out to me online and say, "Hey, I've seen what you do, and there's a few booths left at this energy conference, and I thought you'd be a good fit. So I'd love to have you." And it was like a $150 booth fee or whatever. Within 20 minutes, I'm like, "Okay, that's my answer. I'm going to do it." And so I spent the couple weeks leading up to that event getting an office space set up. I literally spent all my money, everything I had in savings, on creating this space to deliver messages. And I remember just going to IKEA with my sisters and them being like, "Oh, you should get this and that and this and that." And I was like, "Okay, let's go." Like, it just felt so exciting and freeing to step into that space. And I go to the energy conference and I was booked the whole day doing little mini readings to the point where I was exhausted for 3 days after. I would never do that again because it was so freaking intense. But it was just what my soul needed because it was like a drop in really quickly to deliver a message. And then they were gone. And then again and again and again and again. And it was a way of trusting myself. And I could not have done that on my own without having support from the other side because that was literally terrifying. Having every 15 minutes something and another just showing up, it was very intense. It was after that event that I allowed my schedule to be open and I had people coming over for sessions regularly. And I just was stepping in and just trusting that whatever was supposed to be would just show up. And it was a beautiful space of surrender and just allowing God to work with me. And when I wasn't delivering messages, I was literally thinking to myself throughout the weeks, what am I doing and how am I doing this? And I had to go hiking and be outside a lot to ground myself down because if I thought about it too much, I would get in my head and then I would want to just shut down because it was so unnormal and it was so unknown. And I still had that pressure about dating and finding someone and all the things. It just felt like so much. And I remember just praying and just pleading, like, if this is what I'm supposed to do, just please help me allow it to be that way, allow it to show up. And over it did. It kept showing up. And as I kept showing up, my connection to the spirit realm deepened. My connection to myself and trusting what was coming forward deepened. And I was able to honor and hone in and share more of who I was as I learned. And that was part of the process. It was a painful process and it was a beautiful process. And there are things that I had to learn that I will never do again because of how it's all about evolving and growing. And how I delivered messages 7 years ago is totally different than how I do them now. And I anticipate in 7 more years, it's going to be totally different and shifting and evolving and growing. And I could go even further and further into my experience, but it really was about just surrendering and just stepping in. I felt called to do it when I was going to school and when I was trying to fit the mold of what society wanted, what my culture wanted, what people around me anticipated me to do. I felt dead inside. And it was not what I came here to experience. And stepping into mediumship and channeling and deepening my own healing with the ancient ancestors, with the realm beyond, with shamanic practices, it has been a huge facet for healing the wounding that I experienced stepping in, but also empowering and reclaiming generational gifts, gifts that have been passed down from the ancient ancestors, along with regrouping and recultivating and reprogramming what I thought I had to be and who I had to be and how I had to show up so that I could step forward into this space. Now, I can't say it's always been easy, and there have been times where I've taken a break and I've done videography, or maybe I went back to do assisting, and within like 4 months, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm totally out of alignment again. I do not feel alive inside. I feel once again that gray filter in my life. And so it's really just trying to focus in on those beautiful aspects that bring color and a pop of life and surrender and connection to the spirit realm. And I could go deeper. I ended up finding the most amazing husband, so supportive, so just my best friend in every way. I'm just so very grateful. I just feel filled. And it's not always easy. Mediumship is not always easy. It's not always an easy career. And it's not about making it a career. It's about delivering the messages and having those messages shifting and soul changing and opening and beautiful and honest. And so that is a little bit about my story of stepping into mediumship. I could go on and on for hours to share, but that's not necessarily the purpose of this podcast. It is to deliver these messages. And so, having that been said, I do have a book coming out shortly. It's in the editing process right now of more details, messages from beyond. As I decided to take the leap and quit school and have these people showing up in my space, I share really about how all of that came to be. I shared about the divine intervention that brought me and Curtis together. There's just so many beautiful things and experiences. And I just feel so excited to share with you these messages from beyond. It was these messages that helped me want to step more into mediumship. And as I was delivering those messages, I was delivering those messages to myself and taking those messages to heart that right now is our time to live. How are we going to live? How do we want to show up? What is the most important to us? And it was listening and delivering those messages that healed and changed my connection, my relationship to life, how I view life, and what I wanted my life to be. And so I hope that this podcast brings you light and supports you where you're at in your journey and helps you to know that you are heard, you are loved, you are validated, and you are so much more than your circumstance. I cannot wait to start sharing with you these beautiful messages from beyond. So stay tuned. I promise you, it'll be worth it. Thank you for tuning in to the Blessed by Angels podcast. It is such an honor to deliver these messages from beyond. If you want to connect deeper to your angelic realm and the support team that you have, I have a plethora of resources on my website at blessedbyangels.org. And of course, I'll leave the link in the show notes. You are connected to the divine. Having divine connection is an innate ability that each and every one of us have. Before we came here, we were spirit. And after we leave this realm, we are introduced back into the spirit world. So having spirit-to-spirit conversations and knowings and understandings are innately and infinitely who you truly are. When we step into this body, we tend to forget. We are not separated from the divine. There is just a lack of remembrance. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, and I look forward to delivering more messages from beyond.